Okay, hello and welcome to episode 2 of Physical Activity Politics. Here I'm going to reflect on some of the academic work which I and others have published, which helps people understand about the risk of taking part in various sports, in this case rugby. Now I'm going to present 2 different case studies with various academic publications involved. Now to do this, I do need to turn off the camera, and so you will only be hearing my New Zealand accent as we go on. So let's do this. Now to set the scene, in 2016, a group of around 70 academics and health researchers, including myself, co-signed an open letter suggesting that because of the high risk of injury in the sport of rugby, the tackle rugby should be removed from schools. The idea was that children should really be protected from this high risk activity, especially since rugby was often compulsory at various schools. And so for more on this topic, you can visit the website of the Sport Collision Injury Collective, and I've put that there. Now, the open letter attracted a lot of media attention. It also attracted the attention of national and international governing bodies of rugby, including World Rugby and England Rugby. And what I was interested in as an academic was, how was injury risk framed by these organisations which provide rugby opportunities? And so I was interested in how was risk, the idea of risk, conveyed to participants and to parents. Was the information true and helpful for people, or was the error, were the claims misleading? Now, World Rugby's response to the open letter was swift and confident. They put out press releases and they put out data, and they made claims such as this: never have players, medics and management been so aware of the risks of injury. And so I decided to dig a little bit deeper into this. As you can see, they put out this chart with a lot of various statistics on it, and it was retweeted and liked by hundreds of people and clubs. And what did people say on Twitter? World Rugby had done their homework. They loved this image. Another Twitter account said, yep, we all agree with what World Rugby is saying. People should stop twisting the story and look at the facts. Okay. So I decided to look a bit closer at the data that World Rugby was presenting. And as you can see on the screen, these are the claims that World Rugby made about injury in rugby. They say at the top here in bold letters, they say, compared with other sports and activities, rugby has a relatively low injury rate, despite being known for its physical activity. Now, even intuitively, that did not seem true, that rugby has a relatively low injury rate. Well, they put up a chart, quite a novel chart of Australia, and it shows various sports, and it says percentage of hospital admissions in Australia related to sport injuries. And the suggestion is that rugby accounts for only 5%, whereas cycling accounts for 25%. And so it suggests, as you can see, that rugby has a very low relative rate of injury and hospitalisation. Well, I decided to look into the source data that World Rugby used. And what I found was the exact opposite of what World Rugby claimed. The source data that was used comes from the Australian government, looking at sport injury hospitalisations. And here's a quote from it. Sports with high participation-based hospitalisation rates were roller sports, Australian rules football and rugby. So while World Rugby is claiming it has a low injury rate, the data they used actually shows the opposite. Let's have a look at the specifics. You can see here that if we're going to compare injury rates between sports, well, we should look at the participation-based rate per 100,000 people. And so for rugby, the source data shows that there's about 1,292 hospitalisations. You compare that to soccer at 433. Soccer is much lower. You compare to netball, another common school sport, at 282. And so clearly World Rugby have made a serious error in terms of presenting the known facts about injury and hospitalisation in this case. Now you can pause the screen and have a look at it in your own time, but it was clear that World Rugby had mistaken the percentage of injuries that were HTTL, or high threat to life cases. So they had misunderstood the data, misrepresented the data, and as a result misled people about the risk of injury in rugby. What happened after this? Well, I contacted World Rugby as part of a small private collective. The collective received an initial holding email response from World Rugby, but then after a period of waiting, after about a month of waiting for a follow-up, I decided, well, let's try and get this information out into the public domain another way. So I teamed up with Professor Alison Pollock, who's an expert in the area of sport injuries, and we published this eventually in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. And the main point of it was we encouraged World Rugby to not only remove the data, but to correct the inaccurate and misleading data, because really they had misled any readers of that earlier information. So a response from the CEO of World Rugby in the same issue of the British Journal of Sports Medicine made some various points. The response said that the organisation takes full responsibility, that they had removed all the errors, and that they were, of course, committed to improving player welfare. Now, my concern, despite being very pleased that the errors had been removed, was that World Rugby did not publicise the correct data, which showed that rugby union actually has a relatively high injury rate and hospitalisation rate. So moving on from that case study, have a look at what England Rugby did. Now they also put out press releases straight after the open letter came out. And since 2015, they had published on their website this Rugby Safe document here. You can see that. And they included claims like England Rugby has a clear process for translating injury research into education, which sounded great. And on page 7 of the Rugby Safe document, they claimed that they talk about rugby as a safe sport. And they made a claim down here which I thought was very interesting. They said there is no evidence to show that rugby poses a specifically greater risk than other sports. So they attributed this quote to Colin Fuller. So I want to examine that quote in more detail. So here is the quote again. There is no evidence to show that rugby poses a specifically greater risk than other sports. Now, as you can imagine, this again sounds totally incorrect, totally wrong, and surely totally misleading anyone who reads it. I would imagine if you were a parent and you read this quote, it might put you at ease. in terms of encouraging your children to take up the sport. But let's have a look at published research that Colin Fuller actually published and claims he actually made. We find that Colin Fuller actually wrote the total opposite of what's claimed by England Rugby. In 2008, in the journal Sports Medicine, he wrote that the sport has a relatively high overall risk of injury. In 2005, in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, he wrote that rugby union has one of the highest reported incidences of injury, irrespective of whatever definition you use. In 2013, he and others wrote that rugby has 4 times the incidence of injury compared to other semi-contact team sports. So as you can see, again, totally incorrect information being published about the injury risk in rugby union by a major governing body. And so what happened next? Well, in 2016, I emailed the official Rugby Safe email address at the England Rugby website. I politely waited for a reply for about 6 months, but nothing ever appeared. No reply ever came. So in 2017, I, along with Professor Alan Bierner, we wrote an editorial in a Nordic Sports Science forum, and we also redoubled our effort and sent another specific email to England Rugby. And so here it is. Here is the editorial that we published: an urgent call for clarity regarding England Rugby's injury claims. And we made various points. We requested that England Rugby retract the entire Rugby Safe booklet. We wanted it removed from the public domain. We wanted England Rugby to announce that they had misled the public about the safety claims they made. Now, at that point, it was a period of about 2 years that those claims had been in circulation by England Rugby. We also wanted them to publish a revised booklet and actually show the relative risk of injury. So what happened? Well, it was great indeed that they retracted the erroneous and misleading booklet. Did they announce that they misled the public? No, they didn't. Not that I could see at all. Did they publish a revised booklet showing the relative risk of injury? No, they didn't. Not that I could see. So you could imagine that, again, I was disappointed that they had not published the data which was available to them. Interestingly, they did apologise. They did make the point that the RFU has apologised to Colin Fuller, which was certainly great. If I was misrepresented, I hope someone would apologise to me. But I was very disappointed that they did not apologise to anyone over the 2 years who would have been misled by their false and erroneous claims. Now, just for transparency, there's the full email. You can pause this and read it in your own time. But I want to carry on to some concluding remarks. And so, to conclude, I want to ask some critical questions about the representation of risk in sport. Why would any governing body, why would any rugby organisation not publish the correct injury data when they were so happy to publish data that they thought was correct? Why would they not publish the data that was actually correct, which showed that risk is greater in their sport? Does a desire to grow a sport, whether financially or in terms of participants, make organisations less inclined to warn people, whether they're parents or players or teachers, about the specific relative injury risk? And lastly, do rugby organisations in particular have a moral duty to share this information? I leave those questions with you, and I'll see you in episode 3. Thanks for listening.